own personal power. Because from an independent point of view, you can't participate typically in the primaries. And so if Trump is putting up candidates that are nuts, you don't have much of a choice, because if Trump gets his way, then the general election no longer matters. And that's the only place where independents have a card to play. So he has basically taken 10% of the population that decides the elections in half of the states, and has made sure that they will never vote for him again. So at least for this next general election in 2 years, assuming that Biden doesn't die, which, reasonable, we're probably going to be looking at a washout of the Republicans. We're probably going to be seeing something that's going to look a little bit like that 1984 washout where Mondale just completely lost traction on everything. DeSantis is broadly respected on both sides of the aisle in Florida. I don't mean to suggest he would be a bad candidate, but I don't think he's going to run this time, because if he does, Donald Trump will dedicate every fiber of his being to destroying his political career. And why would you do that to then only have to run after an incumbent president? So what I'm guessing is going to go down is that he'll stay out of this one and allow Donald Trump to prove to all the donors that he was, again, a horrible, horrible candidate. And then 4 years from now, he'll step in and pick up all the sponsorships. And he will then be running against a non-incumbent Democrat, and it would be a much easier race. He's young enough, he's got the legs. And then, of course, there's that Disney thing that he really needs to get resolved one way or the other, because that is not resonating with anyone. Certainly. Now, we can't blame the Russians for its existence, but they've, like I said, they find natural cleavages in the American political system, and they try to hammer wedges into them. So Black Lives Matters, Blue Lives Matters, they tried to get them going to the same events. They had a lot more success with the Blue Lives Matters folks than the Black Lives Matters folks, but they were still there. Other factions within American politics were not as susceptible. They've tried it with the Hispanics. They've tried it with the gays. Neither of those worked. They tried to get into the abortion issue, but it was pretty clear they misread the nature of that issue in the United States. But anything that involves, say, nuclear power is something they're very active. Anything with the green community, they're very active. And they don't necessarily try to get us to espouse positions we didn't hold before. They try to make us more extreme at what we might already believe. So basically, think of them as Facebook. Significant success, yes. The question now is whether or not they've reached their peak. One of the things we saw at the beginning of the Ukraine war is that the Biden administration unofficially went out and smashed a lot of Russia's cyber capabilities and even hit the bat farm, is what it looks like. And that has reduced the Russians' ability to do this sort of stuff. If it wasn't for Elon Musk and Twitter, we'd probably see significantly less traffic. But oh my God, the Russian trolls and everything had got a huge lifeline from Elon Musk, and that's allowed them to persist in a way that they probably couldn't have otherwise. Yes, no, I mean, whoever is going to deal with this has to deal with this caution. And there's only really three things that can be done. Number one, because it's a foreign power doing it, the executive branch does have tools for dealing with it, as Biden has, at least unofficially, taken some action. The one that really matters, of course, is Congress. But for Congress to act in a meaningful way, the mainstream of both sides of the aisle have to agree that this is something that is not protected speech and pass a law on it. And since one side of the aisle is benefiting from the lies, that makes it a little bit more complicated. Remember, this is not the 1980s when we had moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats. We have a more European-style horseshoe political system right now with a lot more people on the far left and the far right. And on the populist right, I don't think they're the majority of the Republicans, but they're certainly at least 15 to 20% of the seats in Congress. Convincing those people that they've all been had over and over and over is a tall order, especially when you consider that the Squad and the Sanders crowd on the other side have also been had. And that gives a significant voting bloc. And then the third chunk is kind of what we're relying on right now, and that's the courts. If you think back to yellow journalism in the 1890s, which actually got us into a war, it was the courts that ultimately came up with a lot of the rulings on where free speech turns into fraud. And we're kind of relying on the courts, both in the civil case and in the criminal case, to do that for us right now. And that's exactly what tripped up Tucker Carlson. He deliberately created falsehoods or repeated falsehoods, and people were able to go to court and say, like, look, this is false. We know from internal checks that you knew it was false. That is illegal under the current legal structure, and it cost Fox $800 million in the first round, and the second and the third round are still happening with other clients. And so it took that sort of action and 2 years for that to get resolved. With Fox, it helps that he was a bit of an asshat to all of his workers, so even his own legal counsel was turning on him at the end. But now that he's an independent, he's going to find out exactly what the legal structures are in this. It's a very Alex Jones situation that is being set up. Whether or not he's learned his lesson, I doubt it, because this is not the first time that Tucker Carlson has been dismissed from a major network for fabrications. I think this is the 5th time. So honestly, it shouldn't be a surprise. The fact that people still watch him, that's kind of shocking to me. But pieces of the system are resisting this. It's just the piece that we're relying upon, the courts, it's not the fastest way to do it. Here's the deal. Because we have a first past the post system, it tends to cluster the factions in our political system into big tent parties because they have to get the extra marginal vote. They have to get one more vote than whoever comes in second. And that encourages alliances. And when you have a stable alliance, then this propaganda is not as effective because all the other factions know when one faction has had the wool pulled over their eyes, and it gets called in internally. What's happening right now is that we're going through one of our once every generation or two political reshufflings where we've had sufficient change in technology and geopolitics and demographics that the factions themselves are moving around and jumping ship. Now, the last time we did this in the 1940s, we were vulnerable to propaganda from the Germans. And as we were going through that transition, African Americans were all Republicans and big business were all Democrats. What the stage we're at right now is fiscal conservatives and national security conservatives and business conservatives are swing voters. Donald Trump kicked them out of the party because these were kind of the math and maps crowd of the Republican coalition. And Donald Trump hated nothing more than people telling him that he either wasn't smart or that he was wrong. And those were the three factions most likely to do it because they could find Canada on a map and they could do some basic accounting. Trump didn't like that. And so they were pushed out. He was, however, able to draw in a couple of factions that are a little bit more, without trying to sound biased here, emotional. Groups that were socially conservative but had traditionally been part of the democratic framework, the Hispanics and the Union specifically. And so that changed the nature of the party and provided a lot of fresh cleavages for the Russians to go after. Now,